The city glowed like a network of nerves below the penthouse windows, each light pulsing with someone else's dream, someone else's ruin. Inside, silence reigned. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft scrape of a fountain pen broke the stillness. Kian Mercer's signature slid across the last page of the contract, the ink drying faster than his pulse. It was done. His lawyer exhaled with relief. This guarantees your image remains stable until the end of the quarter. Investors will see you as human. Kian's tone was soft, but the edge in it made the man flinch. Married, the lawyer corrected. Kian leaned back, eyes tracing the sleek ceiling lights that reflected off the glass table. Stability, control, the illusion of normalcy. Those were the currencies he dealt in. But as his gaze drifted to the final line of the agreement, his chest tightened. The words sat there like a verdict. No expressions of romantic attachment permitted under any circumstance. It was absurdly clinical, yet it burned. The door opened quietly. Asha Ray stepped inside, carrying the scent of rain and jasmine. Her hair was still damp from the storm outside. She wasn't dressed like the world he knew. No diamonds, no designer dress. Just a simple blouse and determination in her eyes. She looked out of place amid the marble and chrome, yet somehow she grounded the room. "Miss Ray," his lawyer said, standing. "Mr. Mercer is ready for your signature." Asha nodded and approached the table, her eyes flicking to the stack of papers. Her hand hesitated only once over that final clause. "You've read it all?" Kian asked. His voice was controlled, detached, but inside, something twisted. "Yes," she said. "I understand the terms." "And you agree?" Asha looked up at him then, really looked, past the crisp suit, past the practiced calm. "This arrangement saves my center," she said, softly. "The kids there depend on me. I'll agree to whatever keeps the doors open." Her words should have reassured him. Instead, they left a strange ache in his chest. The pen trembled slightly as she signed her name. The sound of paper sliding across the table felt louder than thunder. "Congratulations," the lawyer said quickly, already gathering his files. "You're now legally husband and wife." The title hung in the air, hollow and strange. Kian offered his hand out of courtesy. She shook it politely, the contact brief but electric. They both knew this wasn't love. It was a deal, mutual benefit, clear boundaries. And yet, as her fingers brushed his, a pulse of warmth broke through the cold precision that usually governed his world. "There will be interviews," Kian said, stepping back. "Photos, appearances. Our story will be rehearsed, no deviations." Asha nodded. "I've been briefed." She gathered her purse and moved toward the elevator, her calm steps betraying none of the conflict inside her. The deal would keep her community center alive. But at what cost? A clause that forbade love? To her, that felt like signing away a part of her soul. At the elevator, she paused. Her reflection shimmered in the mirrored doors. She whispered, barely audible, "Don't fall in love." It was a promise to herself. A plea, really. The doors slid open with a chime. Behind her, Kian stood frozen. He hadn't meant to listen, but the words carried in the quiet. Something in his chest, long dormant, tightly locked, stirred painfully. As the doors closed and her reflection vanished, Kian looked down at the table. Her signature gleamed beside his. Two names bound together by ink, not affection. He touched the paper once, tracing her name with his thumb, and wondered why the room suddenly felt too small, why the silence seemed to hum with her voice. Love was officially forbidden. But even before their first day as husband and wife had begun, he felt the contract tremble.
The morning after the signing began with silence, the kind that carries too much meaning. Kian stood at the penthouse window, his reflection a ghost over the skyline. Manhattan stretched beneath him, cold and glittering like the empire he had built alone. Last night he had signed away a piece of himself for stability, for control, and maybe for fear. Behind him footsteps echoed, soft and hesitant. Asha emerged, still in her plain white dress from the night before, the only proof that a wedding had taken place. A contract wrapped in paper and silence, no flowers, no vows, no music, only signatures, and the promise not to love. Good morning, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Kian turned slightly, noting how she stood by the window's edge, not entering his space fully, as if she already understood his invisible borders. She carried a notebook hugged close to her chest, the same one she used at her community center. She looked ready to take notes on a meeting, not a marriage. The staff will arrive soon, Kian said, his voice clipped. There will be interviews, a few photographs. I've arranged for my PR team to brief you in the study. She nodded without meeting his eyes. Her calmness disarmed him. It wasn't fear, it was purpose. She wasn't intimidated by the money, the view, or the marble. She was here for something bigger than all of it. His assistant arrived, sharp heels breaking the silence. The rehearsed story was simple. They had met at a charity gala, fallen in love quickly, and decided to marry in private for personal reasons. The public loved fairy tales, and Kian knew how to sell one even when it was built on nothing. Asha followed the instructions carefully, smiled for the camera when asked, stood close to him but not too close. They both knew the boundaries, every gesture timed, every word calculated. But then one photo broke the pattern. It happened without planning. A flash went off too early, catching Kian looking at her instead of the lens, his expression raw, unguarded. It startled him later when he saw it. It didn't look like a man protecting an image, it looked like a man trying to understand a feeling he couldn't name. After the media team left, Asha excused herself to visit the center. Her world was only a subway ride away, but felt galaxies apart from this penthouse filled with quiet and glass. Kian watched her leave from the window. She didn't take the car offered to her. She walked out into the rain. Unbothered, umbrella forgotten. In the empty apartment, Kian tried to focus on reports, numbers, safe, predictable things, but his mind kept circling back to her, to the way she had looked at the camera, calm, kind, certain, as if she already knew that this contract might cost her something. She believed in love. Down in the city, Asha moved through the crowded streets, every step heavier than the last. She replayed the clause in her mind, no expressions of romantic attachment. The words burned, she told herself. It was fine. She had promised her mother she would keep the center alive, and this deal would do it, but deep down she feared she was losing something she couldn't replace. When she arrived, the children greeted her with laughter and hugs. She smiled, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of pain. A news notification flashed on her phone, breaking her moment of calm. Kian Mercer marriage confirmed, investors respond positively. The headline blared, her photo beside his, like they were two halves of a perfect story. She turned the screen over, unable to look. That evening she returned to the penthouse exhausted. The city lights poured in through the windows. Kian was there, still in his suit, standing beside a grand piano, untouched by sound. Do you play? She asked quietly. He shook his head. My mother did. After she died I stopped. Asha hesitated, then said, maybe you should start again. Music helps you breathe through pain. Her words made him turn sharply. How do you know I'm in pain? He asked. Because, she said softly, people who build walls always are.
The elevator chimed somewhere far away. Her words lingered long after she had gone to her room that night. Kian sat by the piano, running his fingers across the keys, soundless but trembling. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, something unprotected, something dangerous. The contract had forbidden love, but the silence between them was already breaking its first rule. The day began with a storm. Thunder rolled across the city like a warning. Asha stood by the window, watching the rain slice through the skyline. The penthouse felt colder than usual, filled with the quiet hum of machines and unspoken words. Kian's world was built on order, but the weather refused to obey. It was a mirror of everything stirring beneath his calm exterior. He appeared from his office, sharp in a gray suit, yet his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. His routine never faltered, but Asha could see the tension in the way he fastened his cufflinks too tightly and checked his watch too often. There's a charity gala tonight, he said without looking at her. It's mandatory for appearances. I'll have a car pick you up at 7. Asha turned, slightly surprised. A gala seemed like another planet compared to the chaos she managed daily at her center. She wanted to refuse, but she had signed the contract and its terms held her like invisible chains. At 7, she stood by the elevator, transformed. The simple black gown Kian's stylist had chosen made her look elegant, yet untouched by excess. When Kian saw her, his words failed for a moment. She wasn't what his world expected. She was real, not polished marble, but living warmth. It unsettled him. They arrived at the museum, where chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, and music floated through the air. The crowd turned their attention to them, flashing smiles and whispers. The perfect couple, the illusion working flawlessly. Kian's voice remained even during the introductions. But as the room filled and conversations blurred into noise, his breathing changed. His chest tightened. His gaze flickered toward the exit. Asha noticed it instantly. She moved closer without a word. Her hand brushed his wrist lightly, grounding him to the moment he inhaled shakily. But the panic began to ease. It was subtle yet powerful. Her presence steadied him more than any deal or medication ever had. When he finally met her eyes, she gave a small nod, silent understanding between strangers bound by ink. But across the room, another pair of eyes watched them with quiet precision. Vivian, Kian's former partner in business, and almost something more. She moved through the guests like smoke, her red gown catching every light. She smiled when she saw him, not with affection, but curiosity. She had once told him he was incapable of love. Now she wanted to see if she had been right. Asha felt the shift in the air. She followed Kian's gaze and understood without words who Vivian was. The look that passed between the two women wasn't hostile, but wary. Two forces measuring each other across a crowd. Later, Asha slipped away from the main hall into the side corridor, lined with old paintings. The noise of the gala faded, replaced by the soft echo of her heels. She needed space to breathe, but before she could take a full breath, a voice spoke behind her. "You're different from the women he usually chooses." Asha turned. Vivian stood there, holding a glass of champagne. Her tone polite but edged. "I mean it as a compliment," she continued. "You don't look like you want anything from him. Most people do." Asha's expression remained calm. "He doesn't owe me anything. This arrangement helps my center. That's all." Vivian tilted her head. "An arrangement. Interesting choice of word." Her eyes glittered as if she knew more than she should enjoy it while it lasts. When Asha returned to the hall, Kian was all ready. On stage, giving his short speech about philanthropy. His voice was smooth, confident, but she could see the tension in the way his hand gripped the podium. She caught his eye and smiled softly. He found his rhythm again. Her calm steadied him. After the gala, they stepped outside, rain again falling in slow, silver threads. Kian hesitated, then offered her his jacket. She shook her head. "I like the rain. It makes the city feel honest." He studied her profile, the way raindrops clung to her hair before he could stop himself. He said, "You make the noise smaller." Asha looked up, confused. "What noise?" He shook his head. "Forget it," he said quickly, retreating behind his walls again. But neither of them noticed the flash from a nearby car window, a camera lens hidden behind tinted glass. The man inside checked the image on his screen, zooming in on Kian's face, next to Asha's caption already forming for tomorrow morning Mercer's mystery wife. Who is she really? As they drove home, the storm raged louder, lightning slicing through the sky. Kian looked out the window silent, his mind echoing with the rhythm of her words and the strange calm she carried. He didn't know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of cracks in his perfect facade, and the first sign that the contract's rules would never be enough to contain what was coming. The morning after the gala began with headlines and silence. The city's news feeds were flooded with photos of them walking together in the rain. Kian's hand at the small of Asha's back. The caption called it a rare public display of affection. Investors called it stability. The board called it success. But Kian called it a mistake because the world had seen something that was never supposed to exist. He sat at the long dining table, untouched breakfast laid before him, the contract on his tablet glowing like a threat. Clause 17. No expressions of romantic attachment. The line that had once protected him now felt like a trap. Asha entered quietly, hair still damp from her walk to the center. She had refused the drive. Again her phone buzzed constantly, messages from reporters, strangers, and one number she didn't recognize. The message was short. "Tell him the truth, or I will." Her fingers went cold. The past she thought she had buried was clawing back to the surface. Kian looked up from his tablet. "You're trending worldwide," he said, his tone unreadable. Asha gave a small nod. "I noticed," she replied, calm on the outside, even as her pulse raced. He studied her for a moment, searching for cracks, but there were none. She had become expert at hiding fear. In his office, the walls of glass framed the skyline, like an exhibit of power. Kian's assistant briefed him on investor reactions, positive all around, yet Kian felt only unease. He dismissed the team early, needing space to think. He had never minded control until now. Now, it felt suffocating. That evening he found Asha in the kitchen, a storm brewing outside, thunder, close rain streaking the glass. She was cutting vegetables for a meal the chef had already prepared when he spoke. She flinched slightly. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. "I like cooking," she replied. "It reminds me of home." He watched her hands move precise, steady, then noticed the small tremor she tried to hide. "Who keeps messaging you?" he asked softly. Her knife stopped mid-cut. She hesitated, then lied. "Just some of the kids from the center." Kian nodded but didn't believe her. He wanted to ask more, but stopped. The contract gave him no right to pry, and yet something inside him twisted with protectiveness. The lights flickered once from the storm. Asha moved to the counter, her phone vibrating again when she saw the name on the screen. She turned it face down. Kian's eyes caught it for a second. Naveen, the name meant nothing to him, yet it would soon change everything. A few hours later, Asha slipped into her room, locking the door. She called the number, her voice low. "What do you want this time?" The voice on the other end laughed. "You think you can just walk away from blood? I need 50,000 by Friday, or I tell your new husband everything." Asha closed her eyes, forcing back tears. She couldn't let Kian find out about Naveen, her cousin, her one mistake, the debt he had dragged her into years ago, the same debt that had nearly destroyed her center. She had taken this marriage to save what little was left. Now it was all at risk again. Outside, Kian stood in the hallway. He hadn't meant to listen, but the tone of her voice through the door, the tremor in it, struck something inside him. He walked away before she could open it. His fists clenched his chest tight. He hated the feeling. It reminded him of the boy he once was, powerless, watching people he loved vanish into chaos. Later that night, thunder shook the city, lightning flashing across the penthouse. Kian couldn't sleep. He found himself at the piano again, fingers hovering over the keys, his reflection a stranger behind him. He pressed a single note. The sound trembled through the empty space, soft and uncertain but alive. Asha appeared at the edge of the room, drawn by the sound. She stood quietly listening. "You play?" she whispered. "I used to," he said, "when I was still learning how to feel." She stepped closer, the stormlight flickering over her face. "You still feel," she said softly. "You just hide it better than most." For a moment the world outside disappeared, just two people standing in the dim light, surrounded by rules they couldn't obey. Thunder rolled again, and for the first time, Kian met her eyes without defense. "What are you afraid of?" she asked quietly. "Losing control," he answered without hesitation. "You can't control storms," she said. "Sometimes you just have to stand in the rain." The power went out. For a breathless moment, the city went dark. The only light was the flash of lightning that revealed their faces inches apart. Silence heavier than air filled the room. But before either of them could speak, the emergency lights flickered on, breaking the spell. Kian turned away, clearing his throat. "You should rest," he said, his voice steady again. Asha nodded, walking back toward the hallway. Her phone buzzed once more, a message glowing on the screen. A new threat, a new demand. She turned it off and leaned against the wall, her heartbeat wild outside. The storm raged inside. Something even stronger began to rise, the feeling she had promised never to have for a man who wasn't supposed to love anyone at all. The next morning began with whispers. The city's gossip pages were alive with new photos of Kian Mercer and his mysterious wife, Asha Rai. One picture caught them standing too close on the museum steps, rain clinging to their faces. Another showed a hand on a wrist that looked more like a touch than an act for the cameras. But the most dangerous image of all was the one no one had seen yet, the one that had just arrived in Kian's private inbox. An email with no name, no subject, just 3 words. "She is lying." He opened it without thinking, and the screen filled with images. Asha outside a hotel with a man unknown, angles cropped, lighting perfect enough to look real. The timestamp dated months before their marriage contract. His stomach tightened, fear and fury colliding. He stared at the pictures until they blurred, then closed his laptop too fast. His breath came short and shallow, memories of betrayal long buried, pushing up like broken glass. Asha had no idea any of this had reached him. She was at the center that morning, teaching the kids how to make art from recycled scraps. She laughed easily here, surrounded by paint and laughter, away from the cold metal world of Kian Mercer. She felt alive again, but the shadow of Naveen's threat hung over her. He had called again, whispering promises that tasted like poison. She would pay. She told herself somehow before Friday she would protect Kian from her past, no matter what it cost. By noon, Kian's assistant entered his office with cautious eyes. Sir, T. The board meeting is confirmed for tomorrow, and Miss Cross has requested an appearance. She says it's urgent. Kian dismissed him quickly, but the name stuck. Vivian Cross, the woman who once swore he was incapable of love and now suddenly needed his attention again. Coincidence was not something Kian believed in. When Asha returned that evening, the penthouse air felt colder, the space between them sharper. Kian sat at the piano, his back to her. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "Where were you today?" She smiled faintly. "The center. We are painting a mural with the kids." He nodded, but didn't turn around. "Did you meet anyone else?" His tone was light, but his eyes burned. Asha frowned, confused. "No one." "Why?" Kian said nothing. He only closed the piano lid slowly, as if sealing away a secret. A storm was gathering inside him, not of rage, but of confusion. The images in his inbox repeated in his mind until they began to look like truth. His whole life had taught him to believe what could be proven, what could be seen, but something about her eyes when she spoke made him hesitate. Later that night, Asha found him in his study, surrounded by paperwork and silence. She stepped closer, noticing the tension in his hands. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Nothing," he said too quickly. She placed her notebook on his desk and said, "You don't have to carry everything alone." "Kian," her voice so gentle it almost broke him. He looked up at her, wanting to ask about the photos, wanting to tell her he was scared to trust again, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he said, "Good night," cold and final. Asha left quietly, but her heart ached. She knew the signs of walls being rebuilt. She had spent her life breaking through them in others, but this one felt different, heavier. She went to her room and called Naveen one last time. "This ends now," she said. "I'll get you the money, but you leave me and him out of this." Her cousin laughed. "You think he'll still want you when he finds out what you've done?" While she spoke, Kian walked down the hall, stopping outside her door. Her voice, "Ki," aired through the woods, soft but trembling. He heard enough to know there was another man in her life, but not enough to understand the truth. The old fear rose again, the fear of being used, of being loved for advantage rather than for who he was. By dawn, the first headline hit. Mercer wife, secret past exposed. Though the details were vague, the damage was done. Reporters waited outside the building. By the time Asha saw it, Kian was already gone, his phone unreachable. She stood by the window, her reflection pale against the storm clouds below. Thunder rolled across the sky. The contract had said no love, no emotion, no attachment. But somewhere between their first handshake and the moment she whispered his name, the rule had been broken. Now everything built on that fragile line was collapsing. At that same moment, Kian sat in his car, parked in the rain, staring at the images again. This time he saw something new, a detail he had missed. The background in one picture, a mirror catching a reflection, not of Asha, but of another woman. Familiar face, Vivian Cross. His heartbeat slowed. The truth was shifting like light in water. He didn't know it yet, but by chasing his fear, he had stepped right into someone else's trap. The morning came with tension, sharp enough to cut the air. Kian had not slept. He sat in the boardroom alone. The city stretched below him like a chessboard, every piece moving against him. The headlines still burned across the screens. The board wanted answers. Investors wanted assurance, but all he wanted was truth. And truth was the one thing he no longer trusted. The meeting began with polite smiles that hid knives. Vivian Cross sat at the far end, her red lips curved in a practiced expression of concern. Beside her, Damian Ross leaned forward, his tone smooth as oil. "The company's reputation is at stake. Kian, one scandal could destroy everything." He paused, his gaze sharp. "You should consider a controlled statement, perhaps distance yourself from her temporarily." Kian said nothing, his eyes fixed on the glass table. Memories flashed of Asha's voice, calm and honest, of her eyes meeting his, without fear. Every instinct told him to defend her, yet The pictures whispered doubts he could not silence. After the meeting, he returned to his office and found Sora Tanaka, his cybersecurity chief, waiting with a folder, her face unreadable. "We traced the photos," she said quietly. "They're forgeries, each one layered with elements from different images. It's professional work, expensive and very deliberate." He looked up from the folder. "Deliberate by who?" She hesitated before answering. Vivian crossed the account links to one of her media consultants. Kian's jaw tightened, but Sora wasn't finished. "There's something else." The payment for the edits came from an offshore account tied to Naveen Rai. The name hit like a blade. Asha's cousin. The man she had spoken to behind closed doors. It made no sense. Two separate people, two different worlds. Why would they both be tied to the same lie? Meanwhile, Asha stood outside the penthouse building, her phone in her hand. She had called him a dozen times, but no answer. The security guards avoided her eyes, whispers already spreading through the lobby. She returned to the center, heart pounding, the children's laughter echoing against the walls. But even their voices couldn't drown the fear creeping in. In her office, she found Naveen waiting, pale, desperate, his clothes soaked from the rain. "You have no idea what I've done," he said, trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." She stared at him, horror dawning. "You were working with someone, weren't you? Who?" Naveen shook his head, refusing to speak. She grabbed his wrist. "You tell me, or I swear I will." He broke then, his words tumbling out. "Vivian Cross, she offered to clear my debts. All I had to do was send her some old photos of you. She said she'd handle the rest." Asha's knees nearly gave out. She leaned against the desk, realizing the truth. Vivian wanted to ruin her, not for money, but to get to Kian, to prove she was right, that he couldn't love anyone without destroying them. Kian drove through the city, rain streaking across the windshield. His mind a storm of betrayal and confusion. He needed to confront someone, to see with his own eyes whether the woman he had married was the same one he feared losing. By the time he reached the center, the sky was dark and heavy, thunder rumbling above. He walked through the doors. The children fell silent, eyes wide as he passed. Asha was in her office with Naveen, her voice sharp and breaking when Kian stepped inside. Both turned to him. The look on his face made Asha's words falter. Naveen tried to speak, but Kian raised a hand. "Enough," he said quietly, his tone more dangerous for its calm. "I want the truth from both of you." Asha told him everything. The debts, the blackmail, the lies, Vivian's manipulation, every word spilling out like confession and prayer. Kian listened without interrupting, his hands shaking by the time she finished. Silence filled the room, thick as smoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. "Because you wouldn't have trusted me," she said simply. "You never do." The words cut deep because they were true. He had built a life on contracts, rules, and conditions, every feeling bound in paper. Now that paper was burning. He turned to Naveen and said, "Leave this city by tomorrow and never come near her again." Naveen nodded, broken before slipping out into the rain. When they were alone, Kian looked at Asha, her face streaked with tears. "You should hate me," she whispered. "I lied about my past." He stepped closer. "No, you protected me from a truth I was too afraid to face." The tension between them trembled like lightning ready to strike, but before they could speak, the door burst open. Sora entered breathless. "Sir," she said. "We've confirmed it, Vivian." Leaked a second set of photos. "The media will have them in an hour. We have proof she's the source. But if we move now, it becomes a war."
Kian looked at Asha, then back at Sora. "Make it public," he said, his voice steady. "For the first time all day, every file, every trace, let the world see who did this." Sora hesitated, but one look from him was enough. She left to execute the command. Asha stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve. "You're risking everything for me," she whispered. He met her eyes. "No," he said quietly, "I'm risking everything for us." Thunder cracked overhead, and somewhere across the city Vivian Cross stared at her phone as the world she thought she controlled began to crumble around her. The news broke before sunrise. Every major outlet carried the story, the fabricated photos, the forged evidence, the corporate betrayal. Vivian Cross's name burned across every screen as the architect of deception. The city woke to scandal, the empire she had built on reputation collapsing by the minute. But inside Kian Mercer's penthouse there was no victory, only silence. Asha sat at the piano where he used to play, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes swollen from hours of tears. Kian had barely spoken since the night before. He stood near the window staring out at the rain streaking down the glass, his phone vibrating non-stop with calls from the board, from lawyers, from investors, all ignored. He had spent years mastering the art of control, yet for the first time in his life he didn't know how to fix what had broken. When Asha finally spoke, her voice was fragile. I never wanted this to happen. I only wanted to protect what little I had left. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable, the light from the city carved shadows across his face. I know you didn't do this, he said quietly, but knowing doesn't make the damage disappear. She rose from the piano, walking toward him, but stopped halfway when she saw the distance in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it was fear of himself, of how much she had come to mean to him. The phone buzzed again. This time the screen showed Harold Mercer, chairman of the board and Kian's godfather, the one man whose approval had once mattered more than anyone. Kian answered, this time his voice sharp. I know why you're calling. Harold's tone was calm, too calm. Your statement has caused chaos. You've turned the company into a battlefield. It's not too late to repair the damage if you issue a retraction and distance yourself from her. Kian's jaw tightened. She did nothing wrong. Harold sighed. Perhaps not, but the perception is what matters, my boy. The board needs stability, not sentiment. You've let emotion blind you again. He ended the call without replying, his pulse racing. Asha watched him silently. She could see the war inside him, the man torn between duty and love, between logic and feeling, and she realized then that his greatest battle had never been with her but with the ghosts that lived inside his own chest. That night Kian left without telling her where he was going. She waited for hours, the clock ticking like a heartbeat. When he finally returned near dawn, his shirt was damp, his hair disheveled. She rushed to him but stopped when she saw the faint cut on his cheek. What happened? She whispered. I found Vivian, he said quietly. She wasn't alone. Harold was there too. Asha froze. Harold, what do you mean? Kian exhaled, the truth landing heavy. They were working together. He supplied her with the contacts she used, the media. His goal was to push me out of control of the company, replace me with Damien Ross. He believed love makes me weak. He wanted to prove it. Asha's breath caught, everything suddenly clear. The manipulation, the threats, the endless fear, all of it orchestrated to corner Kian into surrendering not just power but his heart. What are you going to do? She asked. He met her gaze, something in his eyes changing for the first time in years. The coldness cracked. I'm done hiding behind rules, he said. I'm taking back everything they tried to steal. Later that morning Kian called a press conference against the advice of every lawyer, every strategist, every voice that warned him to stay silent. Asha stood beside him, her hand trembling in his. Behind the cameras stood Harold and Damien, both confident he would crumble, but Kian spoke with a calm that silenced the room. He began by admitting his mistakes, the contract marriage, the fear, the lies he had built to protect himself. Then his voice changed, growing stronger. I created a clause to forbid love because I thought it made me vulnerable, but love is the only reason I survived what was meant to destroy me. Gasps rippled through the crowd, flashes went off. Harold's face hardened, but before he could speak Sora stepped forward from the back of the room. She handed Kian a folder, live data projected on the screen behind them, financial transactions, email signatures, the proof linking Harold Mercer directly to the smear campaign. Reporters shouted questions, chaos filled the air. Kian didn't flinch. He looked straight at Harold and said, you taught me everything about power, but you forgot one thing. The strongest thing a man can do is choose love over fear. Asha felt tears fill her eyes as he reached for her hand, pulling her beside him, their fingers entwined, for the cameras, for the world, but most of all for themselves. When the conference ended and the reporters were escorted out, the silence that followed was almost holy. Kian turned to her, his voice soft. I thought love was my weakness, but it's the only thing that's ever made me strong. She touched his face gently, the cut on his cheek glowing faintly under the lights. You've always been strong, Kian. You just needed someone to remind you what it felt like to be human. Outside the building, Harold Mercer was escorted into a waiting car, his empire crumbling behind him. The rain had stopped, but the air still hummed with electricity, as if the city itself had witnessed the birth of something new. Inside the penthouse, Kian took Asha's hand once more. No contracts, he whispered, no conditions. She smiled. No fear, he nodded. Only us. But neither of them saw the message that arrived moments later on his phone from an unknown number, the words simple, chilling and heavy with promise. This isn't over yet. The message appeared like a shadow on the screen, just 4 words that froze Kian where he stood. This isn't over yet. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavy. Asha saw his expression change and stepped closer. What is it? She asked. Quietly he turned the phone so she could see it. No number, no name, no trace, just a threat that felt personal. Asha's hand trembled slightly. The press conference had just ended. The world finally knew the truth. Vivian and Harold were ruined, but this message whispered of something darker, something unfinished. Kian's instincts sharpened. Every deal he had ever survived had taught him one thing: enemies rarely fight fair. That night the city felt different, too quiet, the lights outside the penthouse Windows flickered against the glass as if warning them both the storm wasn't gone. Only waiting. Kian's security team doubled their patrols, but it did little to ease the weight pressing against his chest. Asha sat on the couch, her notebook open, sketches of new projects for the community center filling the pages. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting to the look in Kian's eyes since that message, the mix of fear and fury that lived beneath his calm surface. Finally she said softly, "Whoever sent that wants to see you break." He looked up at her and said, "I've broken before. The trick is pretending it doesn't hurt." She stood, walked over to him and said, "Stop pretending, Kian. You don't have to be stone anymore. You don't have to fight alone." His eyes softened, but before he could answer, Sora called from downstairs, "We found something, sir." Kian and Asha hurried to the security room where Sora stood, surrounded by screens, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She pulled up footage from the parking garage below the building at 2 in the morning.
A figure in a dark coat stood near Kian's car, holding something small and metallic, the face obscured by a hood. They zoomed in. The figure turned slightly, just enough for light to catch a scar along the jaw. Sora's voice dropped. "That's Damien Ross." Kian's pulse spiked. Damien had vanished after the scandal, but now it was clear he wasn't finished. Sora continued. "The device he planted was a tracker. We disabled it before it could transmit, but he's watching, waiting for an opening." Kian's voice was cold. "Find him." Sora nodded, already moving. Hours passed without rest. When the call finally came, Sora's voice was tense. "We traced the signal to an abandoned warehouse near the river. He's not alone. There are armed men." Kian grabbed his coat, ignoring Asha's protests. "You're not going," she said. "You can't face him like this." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I have to. This ends tonight." Asha's heart pounded. She reached for his hand. "Please, Kian, don't fight him on his ground. Let the police handle it." He hesitated for a long moment, then whispered, "I can't trust the police. Damien owns half of them." She understood. Then, the war he was fighting wasn't about money or revenge. It was survival. They drove through the rain, the car cutting through empty streets. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows shattered, its walls covered in rust and shadows. Inside, the air smelled of oil and decay. Damien waited in the center, calm, confident. "You made it," he said, smiling like a man greeting an old friend. "What do you want?" Kian demanded. Damien laughed. "What I've always wanted. What you took power, but now I see something better: to destroy you, the way you destroyed me. You destroyed yourself." Kian replied. "You sold loyalty for greed." Damien's smile faded slightly. "Maybe, but you'll still lose everything when the recording goes live." He pulled a phone from his pocket, pressing play. The sound of Kian's voice filled the air, cold and clipped, talking about the contract, the manipulation of the marriage. It was from the early days before he had changed, before Asha had changed him. The clip twisted the truth enough to ruin them both. Asha stepped forward, her voice steady. "That's over. You can't rewrite who he is." Damien turned to her with a sneer. "You think love fixes everything? You're just another deal to him." But before he could speak again, Kian lunged, knocking the phone from his hand. Chaos erupted. The sound of a gun cocking echoed through the space. Sora's team burst through the doors. Weapons drawn, Damien's men scattered, shouting orders in smoke. Through the haze, Kian grabbed Damien, pulling him to the ground. "You don't get to control this story anymore," he hissed. Damien struggled, but Kian's fury was stronger. Years of silence and fear breaking into something raw and human. When the police finally arrived, Damien was in handcuffs. The recording recovered, the war finally over. But outside, Asha watched Kian standing in the rain, his shoulders trembling. The fight had ended, yet his soul still carried the weight. She walked to him, placed her hands on his face and said, "It's done. You're free." He looked at her eyes, burning with exhaustion, and whispered, "No, I'm not. Not until I earn what you gave me." The next morning, headlines declared Mercer vindicated, company saved. But behind the glory, the man himself sat alone at the piano, again, his fingers tracing silent notes. Asha entered quietly, placing her hand over his. He looked at her, then really looked, and in his eyes the storm began to settle, little by little. Peace replacing the rage. But miles away, in a dark hotel room, a new figure watched the news feed on a laptop. Vivian, cross her lips curling into a cold smile. "You think it's over?" she whispered softly. "Just wait, because love always comes with a price." The next week unfolded like the calm before another storm on the surface. Eva. Writhing seemed to settle the headlines. Praised Kian Mercer's courage. The company's stock climbed again and the world believed the war was over, but inside the penthouse, silence lived like a ghost. Kian worked late every night staring at endless data, as if numbers could protect him from the ache of reality. Asha moved quietly around him, her presence soft, like a breath of peace, but he could feel the distance growing between them, like cracks spreading under glass. One evening she found him at the piano again, fingers hovering but never pressing a key. She stood by the door and said softly, "When are you going to play again?" He didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the keys. "When I stop hearing the echoes of what I said," he replied. "What echoes?" she asked. "The things I said in that recording, the cold things, the words that weren't lies but weren't truth either." He closed his eyes and whispered, "I built my life like a fortress, but love doesn't live in fortresses, it dies there." Asha stepped closer, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You're not that man anymore," she said gently. He finally looked at her, but his eyes were haunted. Then, "Why do I still feel like him?" Before she could answer, Sora called his phone, her voice sharp. "Sir, you need to see this now." Kian turned on the news feed, the screen filled with an image that froze his blood. Vivian Cross alive and standing before a camera, her statement calm, her tone confident. "I was not responsible for the fabrications," she said. "New evidence has surfaced, proving Kian Mercer manipulated the files himself." Asha gasped. "That's impossible." Sora's voice came again. "There's a leak from inside Mercer Holdings. Someone accessed the internal servers. The new footage looks real. High resolution. Metadata checks out." Kian's jaw clenched. Whoever did this knew his systems better than anyone. That night the board demanded an emergency meeting. Half the members already questioning his leadership. Harold Mercer's name appeared again, whispered in the corridors like a curse, though removed from power. His influence still lingered. He had allies, still loyal and desperate to reclaim what was lost. Asha watched him pace the office, every move sharp and restless. "Kian, listen," she said. "Whoever's behind this wants you isolated. Don't give them what they want." He stopped, turning toward her, his expression hardening. "I can't let this destroy everything I built." She reached for him, but he stepped back, his voice cold. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm the problem." The words stung deeper than he knew. She turned away, hiding the tears forming in her eyes before leaving the room. Kian stared after her, feeling the emptiness grow heavier. He wanted to call her back, but the fear of breaking her again held him still. The next morning, Kian met with Sora in secret. She revealed what she had found. The data leak came from a private server in an offshore location. The signature on the encryption key matched something impossible: Harold Mercer's personal code, one that should have been deleted years ago, but the access logs showed a new user tag appearing beside it. Vivian Cross. Kian's voice turned to steel. "Trace it," Sora said. "We already did," she replied. "The connection leads to the old Mercer estate." That night they drove through the storm to the estate. The house stood abandoned on the cliff, its windows black, the sea crashing below. Lightning split the sky as they entered. The gates creaked open by the wind. Inside, the air smelled of dust and memories. Kian's footsteps echoed down the marble hall where his childhood fears still whispered. They reached the library where the servers had been installed. Faint lights blinked on old machines. Sora moved quickly, scanning connections until the monitor came alive, a message flashing across the screen. "Welcome home, Kian." His pulse raced. The monitor flickered. Then Vivian's face appeared, calm and cruel. "I told you it wasn't over. You took everything from me now. I take what you love most." He froze. "Where is she?" he demanded. Vivian smiled. "You should have kept her away from this world, but you didn't now. She's mine."
The line cut dead. Sora tried tracing the signal, but it was already gone. Kian's hands shook. He called Asha's number. No answer. The fear hit like lightning. He turned to Sora. "Find her now. She was supposed to be at the community center." Sora checked the security feed and her eyes widened. "She left 2 hours ago, but she never made it home." Outside, the storm raged harder as Kian ran to his car, every red light a blur, his mind replaying Vivian's voice over and over. By the time he reached the last place, Asha's phone had pinged. The rain had turned into a flood. The road led to the docks, the water reflecting flashes of blue light from distant cranes. There her phone lay shattered beside the tracks, the sound of waves crashing louder than his breath. Then he heard it, a faint echo carried by the wind, a cry for help followed by silence. He ran toward it, heart pounding, lightning illuminating the shadow of a warehouse ahead, its doors half open. Inside everything was dark except for a single light swinging from the ceiling, revealing a chair, ropes, and the faint outline of someone bound. Asha, her name left his lips as a promise and a prayer. He stepped forward, every instinct screaming it was a trap, but nothing mattered anymore, not the company, not the contracts, not the empire, only her, the woman who had broken through his walls and shown him what it meant to feel again. As he disappeared into the dark, the door slammed shut behind him and the sound of laughter filled the air, Vivian's voice echoing through the storm. Welcome to the end, Kian Mercer. Let's see how much love can save you now. The warehouse smelled of salt and metal, the storm outside pounding against the thin walls, lightning flashing through broken windows. Kian's footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, his heart hammering in rhythm with the thunder ahead of him. The single light swayed, casting moving shadows over Asha's still figure. Tie D to a chair, her head bowed, strands of hair clinging to her face. She stirred slightly, her voice faint. Kian. He ran forward, but before he could reach her, a gun clicked behind him. Stop right there. Vivian's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and cold. He froze. Her silhouette appeared near the doorway, eyes glowing with fury and triumph in the pale light. You destroyed me, she said, every word dripping with venom. Everything I built, everything I was, you turned to ashes, and for what? Some charity girl who doesn't even belong in your world. This isn't about her, Kian said quietly. It never was. You did this to yourself. Vivian laughed, a sound brittle as glass. No, you did this when you chose her over me, when you made me small, when you decided that her love mattered more than my power. She stepped closer, the gun trembling slightly in her hand. I want you to feel what I felt when you left me with nothing. Asha lifted her head, weak but steady. Don't listen to her, Kian. She wants you angry. She wants you broken. Kian's eyes met hers, calm but fierce, the fear in him turning into resolve. Vivian, you want me, you have me, let her go. Vivian's expression flickered for a second, surprise then rage again. No, she said softly, I want her to watch you fall the way I did. Sora's voice suddenly echoed from the shadows. Not today, Vivian. She emerged from behind a stack of crates, her weapon raised, her team fanning out around the room. Vivian spun, firing. Once the shot ricocheted off metal, the sound splitting the air. Kian lunged forward, tackling Vivian. The gun slid across the floor, out of reach. They struggled, her fury raw, his strength fueled by something deeper than anger. He grabbed her wrists, forcing her still. You're not the victim, he said, his voice low and steady. You're the proof of what happens when power means more than people. Vivian's eyes filled with tears, hate and heartbreak colliding. You think love will save you, she spat. It only makes you weak.
Asha's voice came from behind, trembling, but strong. No, love makes us human. Vivian flinched as if struck. The fight drained from her body. She collapsed to the floor as Sora's team moved in, handcuffing her. The storm outside began to ease, lightning fading into distant thunder. Kian turned immediately to Asha, cutting through the ropes, her wrists red from the binds. She fell into his arms, breath shaking. He held her tightly, his voice breaking. I thought I lost you. She smiled weakly. You found me. That's what matters. The police arrived minutes later, taking Vivian away, her face pale, eyes hollow. Kian watched as she disappeared into the flashing lights of patrol cars. A part of him mourned, not for what she did, but for what she had become. Later that night, back in the penthouse, the rain finally stopped. The city washed clean. Kian sat by the window. Asha curled beside him, her head on his shoulder. The chaos replaced by silence, not the cold kind, but peaceful, real. She looked up at him softly. What happens now? He smiled faintly. Now we start again. No contracts, no fear, no pretending. She laughed quietly, the sound small but full of life. You really think we can just start over? He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Yes, because for the first time I want something that can't be bought or built. He kissed her, then slow and certain, the kind of kiss that erases the past and writes something new between two broken souls, rebuilding the pieces together. Months later, the community center reopened, brighter and stronger than before. A new wing built with Mercer Foundation funds, but the plaque on the wall didn't carry his name. It carried hers, dedicated to Asha Ray and every heart brave enough to love. As they stood among the children painting the walls, sunlight streaming through open windows, she whispered, You kept your promise? He smiled. No, you kept me alive. That evening, as the city lights flickered, Lo them, Kian sat at the piano again, his fingers pressing the first chord in years, the melody rising pure and unguarded. Asha leaned against the doorway, listening, tears in her eyes, each note a confession of everything words could never say. When the song ended, she walked to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. He turned to her, their eyes meeting in the quiet. "I used to believe love was a risk," he said, "but now I know it's the only thing worth risking everything for." Asha smiled, the light of the city reflecting in her eyes, and whispered, "I love you." He smiled back, the ache in his chest finally easing. "I know, and this time it wasn't forbidden. It was forever." Outside, the night settled over the city, calm and clear. The storm had passed, leaving behind two souls who had learned that love born from pain isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength of all, the kind that rewrites every rule and begins where every contract ends with a heartbeat.